My grandson's small hand gripped mine with surprising strength as we stood in the church parking lot. His voice barely rose above a whisper, but the words hit me like a freight train. "Grandpa, you have to stop my dad's wedding." 30 minutes later, I discovered the truth that would tear my family apart and force me to make the hardest decision of my life. What I found wasn't just shocking. It was criminal. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain had just stopped when Ethan showed up at my door that Tuesday evening. I wasn't expecting him. Marcus usually kept a tight schedule with his son, alternating weekends and Wednesday dinners per the custody agreement with Rachel. But there he was, my 10-year-old grandson, soaked through his jacket and breathing hard like he'd been running. I pulled him inside immediately, grabbing the towel I kept by the door for exactly these Portland downpours. "Ethan, what happened? Did you walk here from your dad's place?" "That's nearly 2 miles. He nodded, water dripping from his dark hair onto my hardwood floor. The floor Dorothy and I had refinished together 8 years ago, back when our biggest worry was whether to go with cherry or oak stain. "I need to talk to you, Grandpa. It's important." His voice cracked in that way it had started doing lately, caught between childhood and whatever came next. I guided him to the kitchen table, the same sturdy oak table where I'd helped Marcus with his homework 30 years ago, where Dorothy had planned our retirement before her heart gave out 3 years back. "Let me make you some hot chocolate, and you can tell me what's going on." While the milk heated on the stove, I studied my grandson's face. He had Dorothy's eyes, that deep brown that could see right through pretense. He also had her stubborn chin, set now in a way that told me this wasn't about forgotten homework or teenage drama. Something had genuinely frightened him. I set the mug in front of him and took the chair Dorothy used to occupy. The one with the better view of our Japanese maple through the window. "Talk to me, kiddo. What's got you so spooked you'd walk through the rain without calling?" Ethan wrapped both hands around the mug but didn't drink. "It's about Victoria. Dad's getting married in 10 days, and I think she's lying about everything." The words tumbled out fast, like he'd been holding them back for weeks. "She says she loves Dad and wants to be a family, but I heard her on the phone with her sister Diane. They were laughing about something, Grandpa. Laughing about Dad's money and how stupid he is." I felt my chest tighten. Marcus had introduced us to Victoria 6 months ago at a stiff dinner where she'd smiled too much and asked too few questions. She was polished in a way that seemed rehearsed, with perfect hair and perfect teeth and perfectly vague answers about her past. Marcus had been glowing, happier than I'd seen him since the divorce from Rachel 5 years back. "What exactly did you hear?" I kept my voice steady, fighting the urge to dismiss this as a child's misunderstanding. Dorothy had always warned me about that tendency. "Listen to what people say, Walt, not what you want to hear." Ethan finally took a sip of his chocolate, buying time to organize his thoughts. I was supposed to be asleep. Dad thought I was asleep. But I got up to get water, and Victoria was in the living room on her phone. She didn't know I was in the hallway. He paused, and I saw tears forming in those Dorothy eyes. She said Dad was the perfect mark. That's the word she used, Grandpa. Mark. Like in those crime shows. She said once they're married, she'll have access to everything, and then it's just a matter of waiting for the right moment. The right moment for what? My hands had curled into fists without me noticing. I don't know. Her sister said something about 6 months being the magic number, and Victoria laughed. She said Dad's so desperate to fill the void after Mom left that he can't see what's right in front of him. Ethan's voice dropped even lower. She said I'm a complication but a manageable one. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed in my quiet house, the house that felt too large since Dorothy died, the house where I'd raised Marcus to be honest and kind and trusting. Perhaps too trusting. Did you tell your father? Even as I asked, I knew the answer. Ethan shook his head miserably. I tried, Grandpa. 2 days ago, I tried. But Victoria was right there, and when I started to say something, she put her hand on my shoulder and said kids sometimes feel confused about new family dynamics. Dad just nodded and said we'd all adjust after the wedding. He thinks I'm jealous or scared of change. Smart woman, I thought bitterly. She'd positioned herself perfectly, framed any accusation as a child's resistance to a stepmother. Marcus, wounded from his divorce and lonely in that sterile Pearl District townhouse, wouldn't question her. He'd dismiss Ethan's concerns as adjustment issues, maybe even drag the poor kid to a child psychologist who'd diagnose normal separation anxiety. But I'd been a high school principal for 20 years. I'd seen every kind of manipulation, every flavor of deception that teenagers could devise. I'd also seen the real thing, the genuine article of calculated predation. And everything Ethan described set off alarm bells that 30 years of experience had tuned to perfect pitch. Listen to me carefully. I sat back down and took Ethan's hands in mine. They were cold despite the hot chocolate. You did the right thing coming here. I believe you. Do you understand? I believe every word you just told me. The relief on his face nearly broke my heart. Really? You don't think I'm making it up or misunderstanding? I trust your ears and I trust your instincts. Dorothy always said you were the smartest one in the family. I squeezed his hands gently. But we need to be smart about this. If Victoria is running some kind of con on your father, we need proof. Real proof. Not just what you overheard, but documentation. Evidence. How do we get that? We only have 10 days. 10 days. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday after next at Pittock Mansion, that beautiful historic estate overlooking the city. Marcus had spared no expense, eager to show Victoria and himself that he could provide the fairy tale ending she claimed to want. He'd liquidated investments, tapped into his retirement fund, booked the most expensive venue in Portland. For a woman who might be counting down the days until she could drain him completely. I looked at my grandson, at the fear and hope warring in his expression, and made a decision that Dorothy would have supported. She'd always had a spine of steel under that gentle exterior. When our neighbor had tried to cheat us on a property line dispute, she'd hired a surveyor and a lawyer before I'd even finished being polite about it. Here's what we're going to do. I pulled out my phone, searching for a name I hadn't called in years. I'm going to hire a private investigator. Someone who can dig into Victoria's background properly. And tomorrow, you and I are going to visit a lawyer I know, someone who can tell us what legal options your father might have if this goes where I think it's going. What if we're wrong? Ethan asked quietly. What if she really does love Dad and I just heard something out of context? Then we apologize and I pay some professionals for their time. I met his gaze steadily. But if we're right, and we do nothing, your father could lose everything. His savings, his home, maybe even his business. Some people are very good at taking advantage of loneliness, Ethan. They know exactly how to find someone vulnerable and exploit it. I thought of Marcus after Rachel left, the way he'd thrown himself into work to avoid the empty spaces in his life. The way he'd talked about feeling like a failure, like he'd somehow not been enough to keep his family together. That kind of wound left a person exposed, desperate for validation that they were lovable, valuable, worth choosing. Victoria had chosen him, all right. But maybe not for the reasons he believed. Ethan finished his hot chocolate while I made the calls. First to Tom Rodriguez, a private investigator I'd worked with years ago when we'd had a theft problem at Lincoln High. Tom was discreet, thorough, and fast. He agreed to meet us the next morning. Second call was to Patricia Montgomery, a lawyer Dorothy and I had consulted when updating our wills. Patricia specialized in family law and had seen enough divorce cases to know every trick in the book. By the time I hung up, Ethan had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, exhausted from fear and relief and the long walk in the rain. I carried him to the guest room, the one that still had some of Marcus's old things in the closet, and tucked him in under Dorothy's handmade quilt. Standing in the doorway, watching him sleep, I felt the weight of what we were about to do. If I was wrong, I'd damage my relationship with my son, possibly irreparably. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus might never forgive me for investigating his fiancée, for doubting his judgment, for choosing to believe a 10-year-old's eavesdropping over his own certainty about his future. But if I was right, and I did nothing, I'd be abandoning my son to a predator. I'd be the man who stood by while someone destroyed what was left of my family. I walked to my study and pulled out the leather journal Dorothy had given me on our 30th anniversary. I'd started writing in it after she died, recording thoughts I couldn't say aloud to an empty house. Tonight, I wrote a single sentence at the top of a new page. Sometimes loving someone means protecting them from their own blind spots, even when they hate you for it. Outside, the rain had started again, drumming against the windows of the house Dorothy and I had filled with love and laughter and the hard work of building a life. In 10 days, Marcus would stand in Pittock Mansion and pledge his future to a woman who might be planning to rob him blind. Unless his father and his son could stop her first. I closed the journal and began making a list of everything we'd need to know. Victoria's employment history, her previous addresses, any public records of past relationships or legal troubles. Financial records if we could access them. The sister Diane needed investigating too. If this was a con, they were running it together. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. Dorothy had loved that clock, wound it faithfully every Sunday morning. I'd kept up the tradition, one of 100 small rituals that kept her memory alive in this house. 10 days wasn't much time. But I'd built a career on solving problems under pressure, on reading people and situations, on knowing when to trust my instincts over convenient explanations. And right now, every instinct I had was screaming that Victoria Hargrove was exactly what Ethan feared she was. A liar. A manipulator. And possibly something much worse. I opened my laptop and began researching. If she was a professional con artist, there would be traces. People like that rarely struck just once. There would be a pattern, a history, breadcrumbs leading back to other victims. I just had to find them before my son said I do. /artifact I've created part 1 of your story following the structure and style of the original, but with completely new characters, setting, and circumstances. The opening hook grabs attention, followed by your engagement prompt, then launches into Act 1, the discovery, establishing Walt as a sympathetic protagonist, Ethan's shocking revelation, and setting up the ticking clock with the wedding just 10 days away. The morning came too quickly. I'd spent most of the night hunched over my laptop, searching for any trace of Victoria Hargrove online. Her social media presence was oddly sparse for someone in her 30s. A Facebook account created 8 months ago with exactly 37 friends, most of whom appeared to be Marcus's colleagues and acquaintances. An Instagram with filtered photos of coffee cups and sunset views, but nothing personal. No tagged photos from friends, no college throwback pictures, no evidence of a life lived before she'd entered my son's orbit. That absence itself was telling. Dorothy used to say that empty spaces speak louder than filled ones if you know how to listen. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen around 7, still wearing yesterday's damp clothes. I'd washed and dried them during my sleepless night, folding them the way Dorothy had taught me, with the careful attention that showed respect for another person's belongings. "How'd you sleep?" I asked, cracking eggs into a pan. Dorothy's cast iron skillet, seasoned from decades of family breakfasts. "Better than I have in weeks." He slumped into a chair, looking more like the child he was than the worried messenger who'd appeared at my door. "Knowing you believe me, it helps." We ate scrambled eggs and toast while I explained the plan. Tom Rodriguez at 9:30, Patricia Montgomery at 11. Ethan needed to tell his story again, this time with witnesses who could advise us on next steps. The boy nodded seriously, understanding that the comfortable part was over. Now came the hard work of proving what we suspected. Tom's office occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in the industrial district, all exposed brick and modern furniture that suggested he did well for himself. He was younger than I remembered, or perhaps I'd just gotten older. Mid-40s with sharp eyes and a handshake that meant business without trying to prove anything. Walt Bennett. It's been what, 6 years. He gestured us to chairs across from his desk. Still keeping Lincoln High's delinquents in line? Retired 3 years back. Right after my wife passed. I kept my voice steady on those words, though they still caught in my throat sometimes. This is my grandson, Ethan. We have a situation that needs your particular expertise. Tom listened without interrupting while Ethan recounted the overheard phone conversation. To his credit, Tom treated the boy like a credible witness rather than a confused child. He took notes in a leather journal, asking clarifying questions about timing and exact phrasing. When Ethan finished, Tom leaned back in his chair. Okay. So we have a fiancé who's possibly running a long con on your father. The wedding is in 9 days. You want me to find out who Victoria Hargrove really is and what she's really after? Exactly. I pulled out the file I'd assembled overnight. Here's everything I could find on her, which isn't much. That's part of what concerns me. Someone her age should have more of a digital footprint. Tom flipped through my printouts, his expression growing more interested. No employment history before 18 months ago when she listed herself as a marketing consultant. No college information. No previous addresses. He looked up at me. Either she's very good at staying off the grid, or Victoria Hargrove isn't her real name. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it stated so plainly drove the reality home. My son was about to marry someone who might be using a false identity. Can you find her real name? Ethan's voice was small but determined. I can try. Tom tapped his pen against the journal. I have contacts at various databases, and there are ways to track people through financial records, property ownership, court filings. If she's done this before, if there's a pattern, I'll find it. He named his rate, and I didn't flinch. Money wasn't the issue. Saving Marcus from financial ruin and emotional devastation was worth whatever it cost. How long will this take? I asked, thinking of that rapidly approaching Saturday. For a preliminary workup, give me 3 days. If I find something substantial, we can decide how deep to dig. Tom closed his journal. Fair warning though. If she's a professional, if this is what she does, she'll have covered her tracks well. We might not find smoking gun evidence in time to stop the wedding. Then we find enough to make Marcus pause. Enough to make him postpone. Tom studied me for a long moment. You understand that even if I find proof she's a con artist, your son might not believe it. People in love, especially people who've been hurt before, they're invested in their narrative. They'll reject evidence that contradicts what they need to believe. I know my son. I met his gaze steadily. But I also know that doubt, once planted with credible evidence, grows. If we can give him legitimate reasons to question her, reasons that go beyond a father's interference, he'll listen. He's too smart not to. Ethan and I left Tom's office with the fragile hope that professionals could uncover what amateurs couldn't see. The morning had turned bright and clear, one of those September days that made Portland feel like the most beautiful city in America. Dorothy would have insisted we walk to the lawyer's office, taking advantage of the weather. So we walked, giving Ethan time to decompress from retelling his story. We stopped at Powell's Books, that massive independent bookstore Dorothy had loved, and I bought him a graphic novel he'd been wanting. Normal grandfather activities while we waited for our appointment with Patricia Montgomery. Patricia's office was nothing like Tom's industrial chic. This was old Portland, wood paneling and leather chairs, law books lining the walls in a way that suggested they were actually read rather than decorative. Patricia herself was in her early 60s, silver hair cut sharp, eyes that had seen every variation of human behavior in family court. Walt. She hugged me briefly, and I caught the scent of the same perfume Dorothy used to wear. How are you managing? Day by day. I introduced Ethan, and we settled into chairs that had probably witnessed 1,000 family crises. Patricia listened with the focused attention of someone trained to hear not just words but implications. When Ethan finished, she turned to me. What outcome are you hoping for here, Walt? I want Marcus protected. Legally, financially, emotionally. If this woman is what we think she is, I want to make sure she can't destroy him. Patricia steepled her fingers. Legally, this is tricky. Marcus is an adult making his own choices. Unless we can prove fraud or undue influence, I can't stop the wedding. Even if Tom finds evidence of her being a con artist, that doesn't automatically invalidate Marcus's right to marry her. But if she's using a false name? Surely that's fraud? Potentially, but it depends on how she's using it. If she's committed identity theft, that's criminal. But if she's simply going by a different name without legally changing it, that's murkier. Patricia pulled out a legal pad. What I can do is prepare documentation. If Tom finds evidence of criminal behavior, we can file for an emergency restraining order. If we discover she has outstanding warrants or is wanted in another jurisdiction, we can alert authorities. What about Marcus's assets? Can we protect those? Patricia nodded slowly. I can draft papers that would create a trust for his major assets, but he'd have to sign them. And if he's in love, if he trusts her, he's not going to sign documents that essentially declare he doesn't trust his future wife. She paused. There's one option, though it's extreme. Tell me. If we can demonstrate that Marcus is not of sound mind to make financial decisions, if we can show that he's being manipulated to the point of incapacity, you could petition for temporary conservatorship. It would freeze his assets until a court hearing could determine his mental state. The words hung in the air like a blade. I would be declaring my own son mentally incompetent, stripping away his autonomy, treating him like someone who couldn't manage his own life. The humiliation would be profound. The damage to our relationship might be permanent. Ethan was watching me, waiting to see what kind of grandfather I was. The kind who respected his son's independence even if it meant watching him be destroyed? Or the kind who intervened forcefully, who chose protection over pride? I thought of Marcus at 10 years old, the same age Ethan was now. How he trusted me to guide him, to keep him safe, to make the hard calls when his own judgment faltered. That trust didn't disappear when children became adults. It just got more complicated. Let's hold that option in reserve. I chose my words carefully. First, we see what Tom finds. If there's criminal evidence, we go to Marcus with that. If he still refuses to listen, then we consider more drastic measures. Patricia made notes, her pen scratching across the legal pad with the sound of decisions being recorded. I'll prepare the conservatorship papers just in case. Better to have them ready if we need to move quickly. She looked at Ethan. You're a brave young man, coming forward like this. Not many kids would risk their father being angry with them. I don't want him to be angry. Ethan's voice cracked. I just want him to be safe. We left Patricia's office with paperwork I hoped we'd never need to file in a timeline that felt impossibly compressed. 9 days to uncover a potential con, convince a man in love that he was being deceived, and stop a wedding that might destroy what was left of our family. My phone buzzed as we reached my car. A text from Marcus. Hey Dad, can we do lunch tomorrow? Want to talk about the wedding. Victoria has some ideas about your role in the ceremony. I stared at the message, reading between the lines. Victoria wanted to control my participation, wanted to position me where I'd be most useful for whatever she was planning. The dutiful father giving his blessing, legitimizing her claim to the family. I texted back. Sounds good. On Dina at noon? Perfect. Looking forward to it. Ethan read over my shoulder. What are you going to say to him? Nothing yet. I pocketed the phone. Tomorrow is reconnaissance. I need to watch them together, see how she operates, look for cracks in her performance. Tom will have preliminary findings by then. Maybe I'll have ammunition. We drove back to my house in silence, both of us processing the morning's revelations. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. People in love reject evidence that contradicts what they need to believe. But I'd been a principal long enough to know that evidence presented correctly, with care and precision, could penetrate even the most stubborn denial. That night, after I'd driven Ethan back to Marcus's townhouse with a cover story about a spontaneous grandfather-grandson day, I sat in my study surrounded by Dorothy's books. She'd been an English teacher, had spent her career helping students understand that stories revealed truth through careful analysis. What story was Victoria telling Marcus? And more importantly, what story was she telling herself? I pulled out a fresh notebook and began mapping what we knew. The sparse online presence. The vague employment history. The overheard conversation about marks and waiting periods. The sister who seemed to be an accomplice. These weren't random details. They were pieces of a pattern, and patterns could be decoded. By midnight, I'd filled 6 pages with questions and connections, drawing lines between facts like Dorothy used to draw lines between literary themes. Somewhere in this web was the truth about Victoria Hargrove, or whatever her real name was. And I had 8 days to find it before she became family. My phone buzzed with an email from Tom Rodriguez. Subject line read simply, "You were right to be worried." I opened it with hands that suddenly felt cold. The email contained a single attachment and 3 sentences. Found 2 previous marriages under slight name variations. Both ended in divorce within a year. Both husbands filed restraining orders. Full report by end of day tomorrow. I forwarded the email to Patricia with a note. We might need those papers after all. Then I sat in the dark of my study, in the house Dorothy and I had built our lives in, and prepared for the fight that would either save my son or cost me everything. The wedding was 8 days away. And now I had proof that Victoria was exactly what Ethan feared. Tom's full report arrived at 6 the next morning, delivered to my email like a bomb with a timer attached. I'd been awake since 4, unable to sleep with the weight of what we'd discovered pressing against my chest. The house felt oppressively quiet without Dorothy's morning routine, without her humming while she made coffee and planned her day. I printed the entire document, all 17 pages of it, and spread them across my dining table. The woman my son knew as Victoria Hargrove had been Victoria Hartwell in Sacramento 3 years ago, married to a software engineer named James Hartwell for 11 months before the divorce. Before that, she'd been Victoria Harper in Phoenix, married to a real estate developer named Michael Chen for 13 months. The pattern was unmistakable. Each marriage followed the same trajectory. A whirlwind romance, expensive wedding paid for largely by the groom, immediate commingling of finances, and then a sudden departure with emptied bank accounts and maxed credit cards in the husband's name. Both men had filed police reports. Both had obtained restraining orders. Neither had recovered their money because by the time the legal system moved, Victoria had vanished. Tom had included photographs. Driver's license photos from Arizona and California showing the same woman with different hair colors and styles. Court documents detailing the financial damage. Police reports describing a sophisticated operation where Victoria would systematically gain access to accounts, credit cards, and investment portfolios before disappearing. The sister Diane appeared in the California case under the name Denise Hartwell, claiming to be Victoria's cousin who needed temporary housing. The estimated total from both previous marriages exceeded $400,000. Marcus had more than that in assets. Much more, if you counted his business equity in the townhouse. I sat at my dining table as dawn broke over Portland, looking at the evidence of my son's imminent destruction, and felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't about respecting Marcus's autonomy anymore. This was about stopping a crime in progress. My phone alarm reminded me of lunch at Andina. Noon. I had 6 hours to decide how to handle the confrontation, how much to reveal, how hard to push. Patricia's words haunted me. People in love reject evidence that contradicts what they need to believe. If I came at Marcus too aggressively, he'd dig in his heels. He'd defend Victoria, dismiss the evidence, accuse me of sabotaging his happiness. I needed to be surgical. Precise. Plant doubt without triggering defensiveness. I dressed with the same care I'd used for parent-teacher conferences when I needed to tell someone their child was failing. Professional but approachable. Concerned but not judgmental. I put Tom's report in my briefcase, though I hadn't decided whether to show it to Marcus today. Andina was already busy when I arrived, the Peruvian restaurant filled with the lunch crowd and the scent of grilled meats and spices. Marcus and Victoria were waiting at a corner table, and I took a moment to observe them before they saw me. My son looked happy, relaxed in a way he hadn't been since Rachel left. Victoria sat close to him, her hand on his arm, laughing at something he'd said. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Mid-30s with carefully maintained blonde hair and the kind of polished appearance that suggested hours of effort made to look effortless. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Everything about her screamed success, sophistication, stability. Everything about her was a lie. Dad. Marcus stood to hug me, and I embraced my son, wondering if this might be one of the last warm moments between us. Victoria, you remember my father, Walt? Of course. She offered her hand, and I shook it, studying her face for any sign that she knew I was investigating her. Her smile was perfect. Her eyes were empty. Mr. Bennett, it's so good to see you again. Marcus talks about you constantly. All good things, I hope. I kept my tone light, settling into my chair across from them. We ordered lunch, making small talk about the weather and the restaurant's new menu items. Victoria dominated the conversation with practiced ease, asking questions that seemed genuine, laughing at appropriate moments, touching Marcus's hand with casual intimacy. She was very good at this. That's what made her dangerous. So, Dad. Marcus leaned forward, his excitement palpable. We wanted to talk to you about the wedding ceremony. Victoria had a wonderful idea about your role. Here it came. The positioning, the manipulation disguised as inclusion. Victoria smiled warmly. Mr. Bennett, Marcus has told me so much about your wife Dorothy and how much she meant to your family. I know this wedding must be bittersweet for you, celebrating Marcus's new chapter while missing her presence. It was a master class in emotional manipulation. Acknowledge the pain, demonstrate empathy, create obligation. Dorothy would have wanted Marcus to be happy. I kept my voice neutral. Exactly. Victoria's hand found Marcus's again. And we want to honor her memory in the ceremony. I was thinking you could do a reading, something meaningful that connects Dorothy's love for your family to the new family we're creating together. Marcus beamed at her, then at me. Isn't that thoughtful, Dad? Victoria really understands how important family history is. I looked at my son's face, at the hope and love written there, and felt the weight of what I was about to do. This moment, right here, was the last time he'd look at me with uncomplicated affection. Once I spoke, once I planted the seeds of doubt, everything would change. But Ethan's frightened voice echoed in my memory. The perfect mark. 6 months being the magic number. A manageable complication. That's very considerate. I met Victoria's eyes directly. How long did you say you've been in Portland, Victoria? I'm trying to remember what you told us at that first dinner. Something flickered in her expression, gone so fast I might have imagined it. About 18 months now. I moved here for work, actually. Marketing consulting. Which firm do you work for? I kept my tone conversational, just a future father-in-law making small talk. I'm independent. Freelance. It gives me flexibility. She smiled, but her hand had tightened on Marcus's. Why do you ask? Just curious about what brought you to Oregon. It's quite a change from California. The flicker again, more pronounced. I'm not sure what you mean. I've never lived in California. Marcus frowned slightly, picking up on the tension. Dad, what's this about? I pulled out my phone, opened my email, and turned the screen toward them. Tom had sent me the driver's license photo from Sacramento. Victoria Hartwell, California license, same face, different hair color. Victoria's composure cracked. Where did you get that? Who is Victoria Hartwell? I asked quietly. And who is Victoria Harper from Phoenix? Marcus grabbed my phone, staring at the image. I watched the confusion spread across his face, followed by the first bloom of doubt. Victoria, this looks like you. Why do you have a California license if you've never lived there? She recovered quickly. I had to give her that. Her eyes filled with tears, and her voice broke with perfect pitch. That was from a very dark time in my life. I was in an abusive relationship, and I had to change my name to get away from him. I'm not proud of running, but I was scared. It was a good story. Probably the one she'd used before when confronted. The abused woman, the victim, the survivor who deserved understanding rather than interrogation. But I'd read the police reports. I knew about James Hartwell's emptied retirement account and Michael Chen's ruined credit. I knew about Diane/Denise and the way they worked together. That must have been terrifying. I kept my voice gentle, sympathetic. These abusive relationships, they leave such damage. I'm sure James Hartwell and Michael Chen would understand completely. The color drained from her face. Marcus was looking between us now, the doubt spreading like ink in water. Who are those people? His voice had changed, losing its warmth. Victoria stood abruptly. I don't have to sit here and be interrogated. Marcus, your father is clearly trying to sabotage our wedding. He probably hired some investigator to dig up dirt on me. I did hire an investigator. I pulled the full report from my briefcase and set it on the table. Because my grandson overheard you on the phone with your sister, talking about Marcus being the perfect mark. Talking about 6 months being the magic number. Talking about how once you're married, you'll have access to everything. Marcus's hands were shaking as he reached for the report. Victoria made a grab for it, but he pulled it away, his face hardening in a way I'd never seen before. Marcus, please. She softened her voice, reaching for his arm. Let me explain. It's not what it looks like. Then explain the restraining orders. I kept my tone level, factual. Explain the police reports from 2 different states. Explain why you've been married twice before under different versions of the same name, and both marriages ended with your husband's financially ruined. The restaurant had gone quiet around us. Other diners were pretending not to watch while absolutely watching. Victoria looked at Marcus, at me, at the report in Marcus's hands, and I saw her calculating. Weighing whether she could salvage this or whether it was time to cut her losses. She chose to cut. Fine. Her voice went flat, all the warmth evaporating like it had never existed. You want the truth? Your son is boring, he's desperate, and he was easy. The whole grieving divorced dad routine? Please. I've seen it a dozen times. She grabbed her purse, her mask completely dropped now. He would have signed over everything within 6 months, just like the others. She looked at Marcus with contempt. You were so eager to believe someone could love you that you never asked a single hard question. Marcus sat frozen, the report open in front of him, his face a portrait of devastation. I wanted to reach across the table, to comfort him, but this wasn't over yet. Diane isn't your sister, is she? I asked Victoria's retreating back. She turned, and for the first time, I saw the real person beneath the performance. Cold. Calculating. Completely without remorse. Diane's my partner. We've been running this for 5 years. And we're very good at it. She smiled, but it was nothing like her earlier warmth. You won't see a penny back, by the way. Even if you file charges, which I'm sure you will, the money's gone. Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, places your small-town lawyer can't touch. Then she walked out of Andina, leaving Marcus and me sitting in the wreckage of his almost marriage. The silence between us stretched like broken glass. Marcus stared at the report, his hands white-knuckled on the pages. Around us, the restaurant slowly returned to normal volume, other diners deciding the show was over. Dad. His voice was barely audible. How long have you known? Ethan came to me 4 days ago. I kept my own voice steady, though my heart was breaking for him. He overheard her on the phone and walked 2 miles in the rain to tell me because he was afraid you wouldn't believe him. Marcus's jaw clenched. You've been investigating her for 4 days and didn't tell me? Would you have believed me if I'd come to you without proof? I met his eyes. Would you have trusted your father's instincts over your own feelings? He looked away, and I saw the answer in his profile. No. He wouldn't have. He would have defended her, dismissed my concerns, maybe even cut me off for interfering. I'm sorry. Marcus's voice broke. I'm so sorry. I was so stupid, so desperate to not be alone anymore that I ignored every red flag. Rachel tried to warn me. Said something felt off about Victoria. Even my assistant at work said she asked too many questions about my finances. Love makes us vulnerable. Dorothy used to say that vulnerability is where connection happens, but it's also where we get hurt the deepest. I reached across the table, and after a moment, Marcus took my hand. You're not stupid. You're human. And she was very, very good at what she does. What do I do now? The question came out small, lost. Now we call Patricia and make sure she can't access any of your accounts. We file a police report. We cancel the wedding and warn anyone else she might target. I squeezed his hand. And then you take time to heal. To figure out who Marcus is without someone else defining it for you. He nodded slowly, still gripping the report like a lifeline or an anchor. Can we go to your house? I don't want to go back to the townhouse. Not yet. We drove in separate cars through the bright September afternoon, leaving behind the restaurant where my son's future had shattered. At my house, the house where I'd raised him, Marcus collapsed onto the sofa and finally let himself cry. I sat beside him, my hand on his shoulder, and let him grieve. For the relationship he thought he had. For the future he'd imagined. For the trust he'd given so freely and had weaponized against him. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Is Dad okay? Did you tell him? I texted back. He knows. Come home. He needs you. Within 20 minutes, Ethan burst through the door and threw himself at his father. Marcus caught him, and they held each other while I stepped into the kitchen to give them privacy. Standing at the sink where Dorothy used to stand, looking out at the garden she'd planted, I felt the weight of the last 4 days settle into my bones. We'd stopped Victoria. Saved Marcus from financial ruin. But the emotional damage was done, and that would take far longer to heal. Patricia called 30 minutes later. I'd already emailed her the restaurant confrontation details. I'm filing an emergency freeze on all of Marcus's accounts right now. I've also contacted the FBI. This crosses state lines, which makes it federal. They'll want to interview everyone. Do it. Whatever it takes to stop her from doing this to someone else. After Patricia hung up, I returned to the living room. Marcus and Ethan sat close together on the sofa, talking quietly. My son looked up as I entered, his eyes red but clearer than they'd been. Dad. Thank you. For believing Ethan. For investigating when I would have told you to mind your own business. For saving me from myself. That's what family does. I settled into Dorothy's reading chair. We protect each other, even when it's hard. Even when it risks the relationship. Ethan leaned against his father. I was so scared you'd hate me for telling Grandpa. Marcus pulled him closer. I could never hate you for trying to protect me. You're braver than I was. We sat together as the afternoon faded into evening, 3 generations of Bennett men processing what had almost happened. The wedding was off. Victoria was gone. And somewhere out there, the FBI was probably beginning a manhunt for a woman who'd perfected the art of breaking hearts and stealing futures. But in my living room, in the house Dorothy and I built, my family was intact. Damaged, yes. Shaken, absolutely. But together. And sometimes, that was the only victory that mattered. Outside, the first stars appeared over Portland, and I thought about Dorothy's favorite saying. The night is darkest just before dawn. We'd survived the darkness. Now came the hard work of finding our way back to the light. The police came the next morning, 2 detectives from the Portland Police Bureau's Fraud Division. Detective Sarah Kim and Detective Robert Chin sat in my living room, recording equipment on the coffee table between us, while Marcus recounted the entire relationship from beginning to end. Every detail he could remember about Victoria, about Diane, about the red flags he'd dismissed. Ethan sat beside his father, adding what he'd overheard. The detectives listened with the weary patience of people who'd heard variations of this story too many times. She's not in Portland anymore. Detective Kim closed her notepad after 2 hours of questions. We checked her apartment this morning. Cleared out. Lease was month to month under the name Victoria Hargrove, paid in cash. Landlord never asked for references because she put down 6 months up front. What about her sister? Marcus's voice was hollow. Diane or Denise or whatever her real name is. Also gone. Detective Chen leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Mr. Bennett, I'm going to be straight with you. These women are professionals. They've done this before in multiple states, and they know exactly how to disappear. By the time we get warrants and coordinate with other jurisdictions, they'll have new identities and new targets. So that's it? They just get away with it. The anger in Marcus's voice was the first emotion besides grief I'd heard from him since yesterday. Not necessarily. Detective Kim pulled out a business card. The FBI is interested. Your father's investigator found a pattern that crosses state lines, which makes it federal. They have resources we don't. But I won't lie to you. Recovery of funds is unlikely. These operations are set up specifically to make money disappear. After the detectives left, Marcus sat staring at nothing. I made coffee neither of us wanted and tried to figure out what to say to a son who'd just learned that the legal system probably couldn't help him. I keep thinking about all the moments I should have known. Marcus spoke to his coffee mug. The way she always deflected questions about her family. How she never wanted to meet my colleagues for drinks. The time she insisted I add her to my bank accounts because couples should trust each other completely. He laughed bitterly. I thought I was being modern and progressive. I was being an idiot. You were being hopeful. I sat across from him. After Rachel, after the divorce, you wanted to believe you could have that connection again. There's no shame in that. Rachel called this morning. He looked up at me. Someone must have told her because she texted asking if I was okay. I haven't responded yet. I don't know what to say. How do I admit that she was right, that I ignored her concerns because I was so desperate to prove I could move on? You tell her the truth. That you made a mistake, that you're dealing with the consequences, and that you appreciate her caring enough to check on you. I set down my mug. Rachel's not the enemy, Marcus. She never was. You two just couldn't make the marriage work. That doesn't mean she wants to see you hurt. He pulled out his phone and stared at it for a long moment before typing. When he finished, he showed me the message. Thank you for reaching out. You were right about Victoria. I should have listened. I'm okay, just processing everything. Ethan's been incredible through all of this. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Marcus stayed at my house, sleeping in his old bedroom like he was a teenager again. Ethan came over after school, doing homework at the dining table while Marcus worked remotely from the kitchen. We fell into an unexpected rhythm, 3 generations sharing space and meals and the complicated work of healing. Patricia called on the 3rd day with updates. The FBI had officially opened an investigation. They'd connected Victoria and Diane to at least 6 other victims across 4 states. The estimated total damage exceeded $2 million. Several other women were working the same circuit, all using variations of common names, all targeting recently divorced men with assets. They're calling it Operation Lonely Hearts. Patricia's voice carried a mix of disgust and admiration. These women have turned emotional manipulation into a sophisticated business model. They research their targets, customize their personas, and execute with precision. How much did Marcus lose? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. About $60,000 from the joint account he opened with her, plus another $40,000 she charged to credit cards in his name before he could freeze them. Could have been much worse if you hadn't intervened when you did. The wedding itself would have cost another $100,000, and she would have had legal access to everything once they were married. $100,000 for a wedding. I thought about the modest ceremony Dorothy and I had at the courthouse, followed by cake at her parents' house. We'd been married 42 years on a budget that wouldn't have covered Victoria's dress. Tom Rodriguez stopped by that afternoon with his final report. He'd dug deeper after Victoria fled, following the money trail as far as he could. The offshore accounts Detective Kim mentioned were real. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, cryptocurrency wallets, a network designed specifically to launder stolen funds. The sister's real name is Denise Marsh. Tom spread photos across my dining table. She's got her own criminal history. Fraud, identity theft, forgery. They met in prison, actually. Both served time in Arizona for credit card fraud about 8 years ago. Been working together ever since. Marcus studied the photos with clinical detachment, like he was looking at strangers rather than the woman he'd almost married and her accomplice. How many others are there? Others like them? Tom shrugged. Hard to say. The FBI thinks there are at least 10 to 15 operations running similar cons across the country. Romance fraud is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. These women are just the more sophisticated end of it. After Tom left, Marcus helped me clean up the dinner dishes. We worked in silence, and I could feel him working up to something. Finally, as I was drying the last plate, he spoke. I need to go back to the townhouse tomorrow. Face it. Start cleaning out her things and figuring out what's salvageable. I'll go with you. He shook his head. I need to do this alone, Dad. I need to walk through those rooms and process what happened without someone else there. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. Some grief required solitude. Some healing had to happen in private. But I want to do something first. Marcus pulled out his phone. I want to call the other victims. The ones Tom found. I want to apologize. Apologize for what? You didn't con them. No, but I let her get away. If I'd been less trusting, less desperate, maybe she would have moved on before perfecting her approach. Maybe the next guys would have been spared. That's not how it works. I put my hand on his shoulder. You're not responsible for her choices or her crimes. Calling those men won't change what happened to them. Maybe not. But it might help them know they're not alone. That it wasn't their fault. That someone else understands. So Marcus spent the next evening making phone calls I knew were costing him pieces of his soul. James Hartwell in Sacramento. Michael Chin in Phoenix. 3 other men Tom had identified in Seattle, Denver, and Las Vegas. Each conversation lasted about 20 minutes. Each one left Marcus quieter, more subdued. They all said the same thing. Ethan listened from the doorway after Marcus finished the last call. That they felt stupid. That everyone told them afterward about red flags they'd missed. That they'd lost more than money. They lost trust in their own judgment. Marcus nodded slowly. That's exactly it. I keep second-guessing every decision I've made for the last 6 months. Every conversation, every moment I thought was genuine. How do I trust myself again when I was so completely wrong about someone? The same way you learn to walk after you fell. Dorothy's voice echoed in my memory, something she'd told Marcus after his first heartbreak in high school. You get up. You try again. You accept that falling is part of the process. The next morning, Marcus drove to his townhouse alone. I spent the day trying to keep busy, reorganizing Dorothy's books, trimming the hedges she'd planted, anything to keep from checking my phone every 5 minutes. Ethan came over after school, equally anxious. Do you think he's okay? Ethan asked, watching the door like Marcus might materialize through sheer force of will. I think he's doing what he needs to do. Facing what happened so he can move forward. Marcus returned as the sun was setting, carrying 2 large boxes. He set them on my porch and collapsed into one of the rocking chairs Dorothy had insisted we buy. Found everything she left behind. Clothes, makeup, some books. All props, I guess. Nothing personal. No photos, no journals, nothing that would tell me who she really was. He stared at the boxes like they might contain answers. There was one thing though. What? A burner phone. Hidden in the heating vent in the bedroom. He pulled it from his jacket pocket. Called the detective. They're sending someone to pick it up. Might have useful information on it. Detective Kim arrived within the hour, bagging the phone as evidence. This could be significant, Mr. Bennett. If she contacted her sister or coordinated with other operatives, we might be able to build a stronger case. She paused at the door. I know this doesn't feel like it now, but you did everything right. You reported it, you preserved evidence, you're cooperating fully. That matters. After she left, Marcus picked up one of the boxes. What do I do with this stuff? Donate it, burn it, whatever helps you move on. I stood beside him. It's just things. She's not in those clothes or books. She was never really here at all. That night, we built a fire in my backyard fire pit, something I hadn't done since Dorothy died. Marcus fed Victoria's belongings into the flames one piece at a time while Ethan and I watched. Designer dresses and expensive shoes, books with inscriptions that were probably lies, makeup that had helped create a face that never existed. When the last item had burned to ash, Marcus sat back in his chair. I almost married her. In 3 days, I would have been standing in Pittock Mansion, saying vows to someone who didn't exist. He looked at me across the fire. How do you come back from that? One day at a time. I watched the flames dance in the darkness. You acknowledge what happened. You feel whatever you need to feel about it. And eventually, you decide that one person's cruelty doesn't define your capacity for trust or love. Did you ever feel like that? After Mom died? Every day for the first year. I lost someone who was real, who loved me, who built a life with me. And I still struggled to trust that any of it had meaning. That I hadn't somehow imagined the good parts. He nodded, understanding in a way he couldn't have a week ago. The fire burned down to embers while we sat in comfortable silence. Above us, stars appeared in Portland's clear autumn sky. Dorothy used to say you could make wishes on stars, but I'd always been too practical for that. Tonight, though, I found myself wishing for my son's healing. For Ethan's resilience. For the kind of future where this betrayal became a story they survived rather than one that defined them. Marcus's phone buzzed. He checked it and showed me the screen. A text from Rachel. I heard what you're doing, calling the other victims. That took courage. If you need anything, I'm here. Ethan and I are here. Maybe that was the real lesson in all of this. That even when trust got broken, even when people proved capable of terrible things, there were still those who showed up. Who offered comfort without conditions. Who reminded you that vulnerability, despite its dangers, was still the only path to genuine connection. We let the fire die completely before going inside. Tomorrow, Marcus would start the real work of rebuilding his life. Of learning to trust his judgment again. Of figuring out who he was outside of Victoria's carefully constructed fantasy. But tonight, we'd burned away the last physical remnants of her presence. And sometimes, that small ritual was enough to mark the beginning of moving forward. In the kitchen, I made hot chocolate the way Dorothy used to, with real cream and a dash of cinnamon. We sat at the table where I'd first heard Ethan's warning, where this whole crisis had begun, and talked about normal things. Ethan's upcoming science project. Marcus's work deadlines. My plans to finally tackle the garage organization Dorothy had been nagging me about before she died. Normal things. Safe things. The building blocks of a life reconstructed from ruins. And somewhere out there, Victoria and Denise were probably already researching their next targets, crafting new identities, preparing to shatter other families. But they hadn't destroyed us. We'd survived. Together. That had to count for something. 6 weeks later, I stood in my kitchen making Sunday breakfast for 3. Pancakes, Dorothy's recipe with the secret ingredient of vanilla extract that made them taste like something special. Marcus flipped bacon at the stove while Ethan set the table, and for a moment, it felt like we'd always done this. Like the crisis had never happened. But the changes were real and permanent. Marcus had sold the townhouse, unable to walk through those rooms without seeing Victoria's ghost in every corner. He'd moved into a modest apartment in my neighborhood, close enough that Ethan could walk over after school. The wedding fund, what remained of it after Victoria's theft, sat untouched in an account Marcus said he wasn't ready to think about yet. Detective Kim had called 2 weeks ago with news. The FBI had arrested Denise Marsh in Atlanta, caught targeting another divorced executive. She'd rolled on Victoria immediately, providing locations, aliases, and details of their operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victoria herself remained at large, probably overseas by now, but at least the sister was facing justice. Marcus had testified via video conference, his face calm as he described the con. Afterward, he'd told me it felt like lancing a wound. Painful but necessary for healing. The burner phone had contained a treasure trove of evidence. Text messages coordinating marks, spreadsheets tracking victim assets, even a how-to guide they'd written for recruiting other women into their network. The FBI estimated they'd helped establish at least 20 similar operations across North America. We ate breakfast while discussing normal things. Ethan's basketball tryouts next week. Marcus's promotion at work, offered by a boss who'd been impressed by how he'd handled the crisis. My own plans to finally start clearing out Dorothy's clothes, something I'd been avoiding for 3 years. After breakfast, while Ethan shot hoops in the driveway, Marcus helped me with the dishes. We'd fallen into this routine, these quiet moments of domesticity that rebuilt trust through repetition. I got a call from James Hartwell yesterday. Marcus scrubbed a plate with more attention than necessary. He's starting a support group for romance fraud victims. Asked if I wanted to be involved. Are you going to do it? I think so. He set the plate in the drying rack. Talking to those other guys, it helped. Knowing I wasn't alone in being fooled. Maybe helping others process it would help me finish processing it too. Through the window, I watched Ethan make a basket and pump his fist in celebration. That kid saved us, you know. If he hadn't been brave enough to walk through the rain, to trust that I'd believe him, Victoria would have succeeded. He's a lot like his grandmother. Sees clearly, speaks truthfully, doesn't back down when something matters. Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in weeks. Rachel's been great through all this. She's offered to adjust the custody arrangement so Ethan can spend more time here if he wants. Says she trusts me to do right by our son in a way she wasn't sure I could before. Character gets revealed in crisis. You could have fallen apart, blamed everyone else, closed yourself off. Instead, you faced it, learned from it, and tried to help others avoid the same trap. We finished the dishes in comfortable silence. Outside, Ethan had started a game of one-on-one with the neighbor's kid. Life moving forward in the way it does, carrying us along whether we're ready or not. My phone rang. Patricia Montgomery. She rarely called on Sundays unless it was important. Walt, I wanted you to hear this from me first. Victoria Hargrove, her real name is Vanessa Holbrook, she was arrested this morning in Vancouver. Canadian authorities caught her trying to marry a widower up there. The FBI worked with them to connect the cases. I felt something loosen in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying without fully acknowledging it. Will she be extradited? Eventually. She'll face charges in Canada first, then the US will request extradition. With Denise's testimony and all the evidence, she's looking at serious prison time. Patricia paused. Your son should know it's over. She can't hurt anyone else for a long time. After I hung up, I told Marcus. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, his hands shaking slightly. It's really over. She's actually caught. She's caught. I sat across from him. You're safe. The other victims are safe. And maybe someday, someone else's grandson won't have to walk through the rain because his grandfather already knows the warning signs. Marcus looked out the window at Ethan, still playing basketball with the unself-conscious joy of childhood. I owe him everything. If he hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't believed him and acted, I'd be married to her right now. She'd have access to everything, and I'd probably be defending her against my own suspicions. But he did speak up, and we did act, and you're here. That's what matters. Later that afternoon, after Marcus and Ethan had gone home to the new apartment, I sat in Dorothy's reading chair with a cup of coffee and her old photo album. Pictures of our life together, of Marcus growing up, of family moments captured and preserved. There was one photo I kept coming back to. Dorothy and me on our 25th anniversary, standing in this very living room. She'd insisted on recreating our wedding photo pose, and we'd laughed at how much older we looked, how much life had happened in those years. On the back, in her handwriting, she'd written something I'd never noticed before. The measure of a life isn't what we avoid, but what we survive together. We'd survived her death, Marcus and Ethan and I. We'd survived Victoria's betrayal. We'd survived by trusting each other, by acting decisively when it mattered, and by refusing to let one person's cruelty poison our capacity for connection. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus with a photo attached. Him and Ethan in their new apartment, both giving thumbs up, both smiling genuine smiles. The caption read simply, "Home." I texted back a single word. Family. Because that's what we were. Imperfect, wounded, but intact. We'd face whatever came next the same way we'd faced this. Together, with eyes open and hearts still capable of trust despite every reason not to. Dorothy would have been proud. Of Ethan's courage, of Marcus's resilience, of my willingness to risk my relationship with my son to protect him. She'd always said that love wasn't about grand gestures but about showing up when it was hard. We'd shown up. And we'd won. Not without cost, not without scars, but we'd won. Outside my window, the autumn light was fading into evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for growth or failure. But tonight, my family was safe, Victoria was in custody, and my grandson's warning had saved us all from a future we'd barely escaped. I raised my coffee cup to Dorothy's photo. We did good, honey. Our boy's going to be okay. And somewhere, I liked to think she was smiling back, proud of the family she'd helped build, the values she'd instilled, and the love that continued even after she was gone. The story could have ended so differently. But it didn't. And that made all the difference. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.